Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice lunch. Um, so we'll just start. As we all know, by 2050, Africa's population will double and more than half will be under 25. The big question is, are we building cities for the future or monuments to the past? Today's panel, African Futures, Placemaking and Future Living, is all about unpacking that. We'll dive into how we shape communities and not just build estates, how we meet urgent needs while planning long-term, and what lessons we can share from across the continent. I'll be joined by three incredible leaders driving this conversation, and first is Bobby Patel, Global Head of Real Estate across Boundary. Please. Thank you. And then Temitope Musewe, Managing Director at Dutum Company Limited. And finally, Julie Morel, General Manager for Property and Development and Operations at Medine Group. So thank you, everyone. So let's get into it. So firstly, I would ask that each of the panelists please introduce yourself and what you do before I ask my first question. So Bobby, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bobby Patel. I'm the Global Head of Real Estate for Cross Boundary and focus my time on building a brand called Mosaic Co-Living based in Nairobi, Kenya.
Good afternoon. My name is Temitope Musewe, the Managing Director of Dutum Construction, company based in Nigeria, providing construction in buildings, estates, and infrastructure across Nigeria and some other countries in West Africa.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie Morelli. I'm Belgian and working for Medine Property, which is a Mauritian company active in different areas such as agriculture, property development and management, and also leisure and hospitality. And we're based on the west coast of Mauritius.
Great, thank you, everyone. So Bobby, we talk a lot about African futures, right? From your perspective, how are we currently developing assets that genuinely cater to the youth who make up the majority of our population?
It's a good question. So I think as developers, we are doing a good job across the continent. And I think the focus has always been trying to match where capital is available to deployment of that capital such that us as developers could benefit and create a sustainable business model. That typically has always been through the build-to-sell business model, and there's been much less focus on the build-to-rent business model. If you look at why that's the case, you'll quickly uncover that because of the amount of demand for real estate, particularly in the residential space, there is been historically a lack of capital available to allocate towards build-to-rent projects versus build-to-sell. That is why in the African cities that we all operate in, you will see a significant amount of the developments happening based on build-to-sell as a model versus build-to-rent. You will note that a lot of developers only start construction once they have sold 70% off plan. And the real question is, why is that the case? In the case, it's pretty simple. There's a lack of access to finance. So I think we're doing a really good job as developers trying to focus our developments for the market. The question is, are those developments catering to the majority of the market or to the market, just a small slice of that market? I argue that it's just catering to a small slice of the market, but there's still a significant market behind it, and that is in the build-to-rent space, which we are unable to tap at this time because of lack of access to capital or lack of access to patient long-term capital.
Oh, thanks, Bobby. I think that's an interesting perspective. And then, Julie, how do you tackle this in the Mauritian context?
In Mauritius, we're creating autonomous living hubs in peri-urban and rural areas, commonly called smart cities. And so they not only include the live, work, play component, but also the learn and care aspect. And at Medine, the company I work with, as education and well-being is close to our heart, it definitely responds to that, and it translates it perfectly. So again, I think shaping the future goes through proper urban planning, and by integrating modern infrastructure at one side, advanced connectivity, soft mobility solutions, and fostering an enjoyable and balanced lifestyle, we can definitely create an environment where people can thrive and future generations can live. So that is my answer to the question. And just to bounce back on what you were saying, of course, to have a proper cash flow running and to be able to continue to grow an asset portfolio, we're definitely working on that basis. So definitely promoting build and sell products, mostly residential, to be able to grow our build and lease portfolio. So that's definitely still the case in Mauritius too.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Back to you, Bobby. One more question. At the same time, do you think we're unconsciously imposing generational or societal beliefs into design so that what we call aspirational projects might not actually reflect what younger generations really want?
Yeah, and I can certainly speak to East Africa generally, but I don't want to generalize across the continent. But I think the problem is the same. And that is, society has always pressurized the youth of today into a very generational norm, which is a narrative that says home ownership is the fastest way to bring you out of poverty. And if you look back at history, you'll quickly understand that is societal pressure that has come from the West. And it's sort of and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's sort of like an American pressure, and that is, you are successful if you own a house and have a white picket fence. The question is that relevant to Africa today? Or is it relevant to America 50, 60 years ago? Unfortunately, particularly in East Africa and Kenya specifically, we have found ways to make mortgages, for example, to allow for home ownership to be more affordable. But we're 60 years too late. But we still clap our hands saying that we have the Kenya Refinance Mortgage Company that is offering subsidized mortgages on a long tenor basis for people to purchase homes. The question is really, who are those people? I argue those people are 30% of the population, which are above the age of 35. They've already surpassed the need for homes. They already, if they're taking on 30-year mortgages at the age of 35, by the time you get to 65, you sort of, if that's your first home, then really it's very often that you won't qualify for that mortgage. So the real question is for the 70% of the population which is below the age of 35, which that metric is the same for all across Africa, who are we building these homes for? If we're building them to sell, why are we building them to sell? Why aren't we offering the youth opportunities to rent? I know the problem exists here in South Africa as well. And as for Kenya, the vast majority of the population in the youthful space is unemployed. You have a 30% unemployment rate, 35% unemployment rate. If the population of the country is 70% below the age of 35, that means that the vast majority of unemployed people are in the youthful space. If you offer that young man or woman a job, it is very likely that you're not offering a job to them in country. You're offering them a job outside of the country, which is why so many young Kenyans that are incredibly intelligent are traveling to Canada, Australia, the UAE for jobs. Now, why would that individual want to take on a 30-year mortgage to buy a house? I argue that actually that's a societal pressure. What we should be doing is providing them affordable, dignified, attainable housing through rentals, which allows it to be flexible for them to be able to go to Dubai if they want to work at the airport. Like most Kenyans, you'd see most of the Dubai airport is actually run by Kenyans. And you will quickly realize that that flexible living arrangement is what is needed by these quickly urbanizing African cities.
Thank you, Bobby. Now, to Temitope, knowing that a lot of your projects are based, well, in Nigeria and then West Africa, and me being from there, I think I have a fair idea of what's been done there. So when you're putting up a housing project, the big challenge, at least what I know for Nigeria, is avoiding isolated estates, because there are quite a lot of that there. How do you sequence infrastructure with residential development so that we end up with sustainable communities?
Thanks for that question, Tommy. So the observation is very clear here, and it is that there is a general disposition to focus on units. How many housing units are we producing? And without necessarily thinking in detail about how that development will connect with the rest of the community. And this is a clear challenge in, at least I can speak for Nigeria and probably some West African countries. The sequencing of infrastructure and housing is what's going to make the difference between success and failure. So typically, if you're to achieve a connected development as opposed to just an isolated estate, the first thing you need to do is to focus on the connecting infrastructure, and that is the roads, the drainages that lead to or around that development, which for the most part is a government responsibility. And this is where the challenge is, because most of our governments have funding gaps, and of course this affects every sector, including infrastructure. So in an ideal situation, the first thing that needs to happen is to engage your government officials to know what the plan for infrastructure, the roads coming to the area, have they planned for it? What is the master plan for the area? When is the road going to get there? But what we see, if I use Lagos as a case study, is that because of the population growth, urban migration happening, there's a lot of pressure to produce houses, and developers being private sector, you acquire a parcel of land, and your first drive is, let me put up the houses. But what should happen is the roads. So what we find happening now in Nigeria is developers are also taking on infrastructure as part of their costs, which in the rest of the conversation would eventually affect pricing, which almost eliminate the idea of affordability. So ideally, the first thing is the connecting infrastructure, make sure the roads get there. Then you start talking about utilities, power, water, all of that. And then when you actually go into your actual development, you start planning the development in such a way that you create anchor communities. So you start building out your schools, your You plan for schools, you plan for clinic, a community center, and then you almost doing what would look like a hub and a spoke. So you create a hub, and then the houses are like the spoke around it, and so that you're not just creating, just houses, so that the idea of people living in a community, all of that is already planned into your development. And then you start thinking of social infrastructure, like how do people go to school, how does the community get integrated. That is also part of infrastructure. And then there's a part that is so essential for development and is like the end of it, which is after you've provided the houses, you provided the physical infrastructure, the social infrastructure, then you start thinking of how the people are going to live after you have built the houses when you're gone. And then goes into possibility of creating communities where people can get jobs, employability, so that people are close enough to their workplaces. So maybe start thinking of stimulating industrial development around the area so that you create jobs as well. So, we're talking about how to ensure sustainability, how to ensure community living. All of this needs to come together from the physical infrastructure outside of your development to the physical infrastructure within your development and the social infrastructure. And then after the development is done, how do people live and continue to enjoy, living in those communities?
Amazing. Thank you, Temitope. Now, Julie, right? Same question. How do you sequence infrastructure development with the residential projects that you do at Medin Group to create sustainable communities?
What we do at Medin is very much in line with what Tope was explaining just before. So we, of course, ensure that the infrastructure and utilities such as roads, water and electricity supply, but also cycling paths, green corridors and mobility systems are in place. In parallel when we deliver residential units. Of course, this means planning ahead because you have to be able to fund your infrastructure, otherwise you will be bankrupt in a year's time. But so if you plan ahead properly, I would say 2 years ahead, then of course you can just keep the ball rolling and make sure that you create living communities and not just is isolated housing estates. So that's definitely what we prioritize. So access and mobility, firstly, public realm, like public spaces, kids play areas, etc. And of course, essential services to make it livable, workable, playable, learnable, and careable for the people who live there. And we try to do that within a 15, 20 minutes walkable distance. That's the aim, but it's difficult because sometimes it's a little bit further away, but definitely we try to make it work in that sense. And so like you were saying, Tope, of course, the result is a higher absorption rate, stronger community engagement, and also sustainable long-term value creation for the stakeholders.
Great, thank you, Julie. Now, back to you, Temitope, right? You just said for Lagos, for example, that you gave, where developers technically have to now do like infrastructure. What does it really cost to build these integrated communities in African cities? So for you, it'll be Lagos, for example. And then how do you make the economics work? With Bobby talking about having to ensure that we are catering to the youth, right? How do you make it work across different income segments?
All right. That was actually the crux of the matter, right? The cost, and then what we have found is what is termed the cross-subsidy model, and I will come to that shortly. But you must make sure that your development works socially and financially for it to even make any sense. And so what are the cost drivers? When you look at infrastructure, for example, in a place like Lagos, and I imagine most of West Africa, infrastructure costs probably 30 to 40% of your entire development. So roads, drainage, sewage. But what I've seen with some developers and developments in Lagos, for example, is a heavy underinvestment or underestimation of what infrastructure costs are, because most developers are just focused on the houses. But 30 to 40% of your cost, if you've planned it properly, actually needs to go to non-houses, if you know what I mean. So that is the roads, the drainages, and all of that. And if you don't get that right, you have a big problem, because easily that would have come to around $25,000 to $40,000 a hectare, just putting it roughly, in a place like Lagos and similar, depending on the soil conditions. Now, when you now think about social infrastructure, so your schools, your clinics, and all of that, that also comes to amount to around 10 to 15% of the cost. And then you're left with around 40 to 50% for the actual houses. So that is a cost structure. Now, in terms of aiming for affordability, the cross-subsidy model that we've seen to work is when you're developing, a couple of units, you have some that you refer to as affordable, so your 1 to 2 beds, the affordable housing, you would probably put that to be around maybe 30 to 50% of the development. Then the middle income, so those are your 3 to 4 beds. You would have those coming in around 30% of the entire, development. And then you have the 20% that is going to be more premium, the villas. And what you want to do is to somehow have the premium subsidize your infrastructure cost for the entire development. So by the time the price you're selling for the low income is slightly lower, but that is kind of cross-subsidized by the premium. And what does this do? It helps to balance your costs and also to develop a wholesome community, so that the community has, a cross-section of different people in the society. And then the other thing that we're seeing now in trying to manage costs is building core houses. So you build the core of the house, sort of a shell, and you allow the buyers or the occupiers to finish it to their taste in their time, and also give them room to expand. So we've done this in a development at the outskirts of Abuja, where the houses are expandable. So you start with your 1 or 2 beds, but as you move in and you make more money, there's a bit of a compound you can extend and add an additional room, increase your kitchen over time. And those are models that we've seen to just be able to capture the ability to create affordability across different segments of the economy.
Amazing. Thank you. Bobby, while we are planning for the future, people have urgent needs today. How are developers and planners balancing those immediate population demands with a long-term vision of African cities?
Yeah, so I really like what Tobe was saying, and I think I absolutely agree. The challenge, particularly in African cities, is infrastructure. It's not actually the roofs over people's heads. People are easily able to put roofs over their own heads, and you can clearly see it in slum areas. It's not about the roofs over their heads. It's actually about the infrastructure, and people are not battling with with staying out of the rain. They can manage to do that. People are battling with disease, and disease is what is killing people, not being out in the rain. And that exists because our governments are unable to provide the infrastructure necessary to cater to the growing population. So how do we try to solve that issue? We firmly believe that we don't need to wait for the government. Because if we begin to develop with the hope that a road is going to come, the road won't come, but the houses will be occupied. The problem is the road won't come. So if we start to look outside of the major cities, and I'll pick Nairobi as one of them, if you go outside of Nairobi city, just by a kilometer, you'll find speculative buyers that have bought up land and are waiting for developers to come and scoop up that land so that they can build multiple housing units. It's a good strategy, but the problem is that those houses are expensive, and you believe that you can occupy those houses with people that can get to work in Nairobi on time. The reality is they're not. They're sitting in traffic for 4, 5 hours a day just so that they could get to work. And most of those people are young people. Now, is that fair? I don't think so. What do we do to address that? Well, we don't care about going outside of Nairobi to help solve the housing crisis problem. And this problem exists all over the world, but certainly in Africa. What we try to do is utilize what does exist within Nairobi and try to repurpose those assets that do exist into solving a need of today. And that is, we try to repurpose old commercial buildings into assets that can cater to the need of today, not tomorrow. Because by the time you focus on trying to solve the need of tomorrow, you'd have forgotten about all the people that need their problem solved today. So we go in, as developers, we pay a lot of money for land that is really expensive in these African cities, and we look for good quality old assets that we can reposition to serve the urban youth of that particular country. We've started with Kenya, it's hugely successful, and we're really excited about bringing these products to other parts of the continent, because we firmly believe that it's not actually about trying to solve the problem of Africa, that the problem that Africa is going to be facing tomorrow. It's actually trying to solve the immediate problem that Africa is facing, which is today. And we're not interested in sort of waiting. We want to do it with force. We want to do it immediately, and we don't really want to put the faith in the ability to say that the government will take care of it later on.
Well, thank you, Bobby. So, Temitope, over to you again. You've worked across different African markets. What infrastructure lessons have you seen in one market that could realistically be adapted to another?
Right. I'll just mention maybe one or two, because the beauty of African cities is that while the context differs from Lagos to Kigali to Accra, Nairobi, the infrastructure challenges are very similar, right? It's the same thing, unreliable grids, weak trunk services, and rapid urban growth. So some of the infrastructure initiatives we're seeing, which I think can work, is off-grid solutions, for example, for power. So we've been seeing a lot of off-grid decentralized utilities. This has become very big in Kenya and Tanzania, and we're beginning to do the same in Nigeria with gas-powered IPPs or solar mini grids. So I'm sure this is going to become, I've seen this also in Ghana as well, where, because the grid is so old and unreliable, both government and private sector are like, we need to come together to find a solution to this, and off-grid solutions are beginning to become very popular. The other is one I mentioned earlier, which is about the core construction, where this started becoming popular in Egypt and Morocco, where you build the core of the houses, the shell, and you allow the owners to finish it to their taste. This is also becoming very popular in Nigeria and in West Africa. just to be able to achieve the objective. And then the third one is the PPPs, where government provides the land in partnership with private sector. We've done this in Nigeria as well. So government provides the land just to bring down the cost. That is some form of subsidy because there's so much land in Africa. So government can afford to do that. And that way, the developer comes in and all he's thinking about is the cost of the actual construction of the infrastructure and the buildings, and the cost of land is taken away. These are models that are becoming very, very popular, and I'm seeing across many African countries. And I think there are models that would help us achieve sustainable communities across the continent.
Thank you, Temitope. Julie, do you have any words to say on this?
I can, yes. I think you were talking about public-private partnerships. That's definitely the way we do it in Mauritius too. So again, as a landowner, basically, well, we have a huge land bank in our portfolio. We definitely work along with the government to put in place major infrastructure lines just to, create that connectivity and enable, cities or peri-urban areas to grow. And again, just to conclude on that question, I believe that, it's a little bit the same everywhere, right? If you integrate sustainability, flexibility, and inclusivity, then at least you can make it work with a little bit of goodwill and bon sens, comme on dit en français. You can definitely make it work. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you, Temitope, thank you, Bobby, and thank you, Julie, and thank you, everyone here. If there's one thing I think we can take away from today, it's that Africa's future isn't just about concrete or building. It's about people, communities that work, cities that breathe, and spaces that reflect today's needs and tomorrow's dreams. So from Lagos to Mauritius and Nairobi, the challenges may look different, but the goal is the same: creating places where Africans don't just live but thrive. So as we leave this room, the real question is, what role will you be playing in building Africa's future? Thank you.